It was a cold winter night, just a few days before the wedding, with everything planned and ready. I'm home. As soon as I walked in the door, a nightmare unfolded. Mike, what are you doing here? Mike, it was a one time mistake. There, lying in bed, was my fiancee and my childhood friend. Having lost everything, I met a homeless family. From that point, my life, which had plunged into despair, took a shocking turn and began to change drastically. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Revenge Office. Today, I'm going to share a new story with you. Let's get started. My name is Mike Anderson. I'm a 25-year-old employee working at a company. The snow started falling lightly, and people in the city huddled up, trying to keep warm as they walked by. The children looked up at the sky and started shouting with excitement. I watched them through the glass window of the store. Mike, what do you think of this one? Ma'am, it suits you perfectly. I was shopping for wedding rings with my fiancée, Patricia. With the wedding approaching soon, my days were busy but fulfilling. Yeah, it's simple, but it has a luxurious feel and looks really beautiful. Don't you think it's a bit too mature for me? I feel like something cuter would suit me better. Patricia, with her idol like cute features, loved flashy, sparkling things. It felt like a dream that someone like her, who was always the center of attention wherever we went, would be dating an ordinary guy like me. According to her, being with you doesn't make my heart race, Mike, but I feel secure. As I watched her happily pick out rings, my smartphone buzzed with a message. It was from my childhood friend and best buddy, Daniel. How's the ring shopping going, Mr. Groom? Let's grab a drink again soon. Daniel had always been a jokester, but he was bright and popular. Being quite the ladies' man, he seems to have a new woman with him every time we meet. When I told him about my engagement, no one was happier or more excited than him. We even went out to dinner together, me, Patricia, and him. As for himself, he had no plans to settle down, saying he still wants to have a little more fun. Though he had a bad habit with women, Daniel always looked out for me. He was a good guy. Since it's something you'll wear every day, I think a simple design would be perfect. With the sales associate's advice, Patricia picked out a simple yet expensive ring with a diamond. As I watched her beam with joy, saying she felt like an adult woman, I couldn't help but savor the happiness I felt. To be honest, the ring was well over my budget, but a wedding ring is something you wear for life. I'm usually cautious by nature, but this time, I resolved to make the big decision like a man. Mike, let's hold hands. Hand in hand, we left the store, waved off by the associate. Wearing matching rings, anyone could see we were a happy, close couple. I believed, without a doubt, that this happiness would last forever. That was until the nightmare arrived. It was a snowy night, with the wedding plans all set and just a few days left until the ceremony. That night, too, it was snowing. Finishing work earlier than planned, I hurried home. Something had been strange about Patricia lately. She had started going back to her parents' house more often, and she spent more time locked in her room talking to her family on the phone. Even when we talked, she seemed distracted, and her smiles became rare in front of me. When I asked if something was bothering her, she'd just say, "Nothing." With the wedding coming up, I was seriously worried that she might be feeling wedding blues. I stopped by her favorite bakery and bought 2 cakes. Maybe if we had some cake and talked, I could figure out a way to help her. When I inserted the key into the door, I realized it was already unlocked. Did Patricia forget to lock it? Patricia, I'm home. The door was unlocked. Laughing, I walked in, only to hear the panicked voices of a man and woman and a loud noise coming from the bedroom. Patricia, did we have a guest? She always told me when friends were coming over. Feeling uneasy, I opened the bedroom door and saw Patricia, pale as a ghost, and Daniel, with a look of resignation on his face, sitting on the bed. The bag with 2 cakes slipped from my hand and fell to the floor. I wonder what kind of expression I had on my face. No, it's not what you think. It was just a moment of weakness. Patricia, looking at me like she'd seen a monster, desperately tried to explain herself. What do you mean? It's not. That was all I could manage to say before I unleashed a torrent of insults at the two of them. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I'll never forget Patricia's tear-streaked face as she screamed, or the smirk on Daniel's face as he said, "It was just a one-time mistake. No need to get so worked up." Hearing that, something inside me suddenly went cold, and I shouted, "The engagement is off. Both of you, get out right now." Daniel muttered, "Oh well," as he gathered his things and walked past me, out the door. "Mike, please, no, tell me you're joking. I was just a little bored. I just wanted some excitement." I shook off Patricia as she tried to cling to me and yelled again, "Don't touch me. I wish I could believe this was all just a bad dream. Don't make me say these things." I had loved Patricia, her cuteness, her carefree spirit. And Daniel, the jokester with a good heart, had been my irreplaceable best friend. In an instant, I had been betrayed by both of them. I clenched my teeth as I cleaned up the cakes that had fallen to the floor. It was pathetic for a 25-year-old, but no matter how many times I wiped my eyes, the tears wouldn't stop. When I looked up, my eyes landed on the bed that Patricia and Daniel had used. A wave of disgust and nausea hit me, and I rushed to the bathroom. I couldn't stay in this house any longer, not after living here with Patricia, who betrayed me all this time. Without any destination in mind, I stepped out into the dark night. Even as the snow continued to fall from the sky, I felt nothing. With my breath freezing in the air, I wandered aimlessly until I ended up at a park. I remember coming here on dates with Patricia. As those memories came to mind, I sat down on the cold bench. Back then, I never would have imagined this future. Did Patricia see this coming? Where did everything start to go wrong? Just thinking about it was enough to drive me crazy. There was a mountain of things I needed to do: canceling the wedding venue, notifying the guests, telling my parents. But right now, I didn't want to think about any of it. As I sighed, I suddenly noticed someone sitting on the bench next to me, and I was surprised. A middle-aged woman and a teenage girl, likely her daughter, were huddled together, trying to keep warm. Even though it was a snowy night, they weren't wearing coats, just thin clothing. Both of them looked pale and so thin that it seemed they might be malnourished. It was clear that something was wrong. "Excuse me, are you okay? If you'd like, I can lend you my coat." I instinctively called out, and the woman flinched, looking at me with concern. "Oh, I'm sorry. You just looked really cold." I placed my coat on the bench next to them and stepped back a little. The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she kept gazing at me. She then draped the coat over the young girl, who had been sitting silently with her head down the whole time. Realizing I wasn't a threat, The woman slowly started to explain their situation. As I thought, they were mother and daughter. The mother's name was Lisa, and the daughter was Nancy. Nancy was only 17 years old, a high school junior. As a car passed by, its headlights briefly lit up the area, and I was shocked. Lisa and Nancy's faces and bodies were covered in bruises and cuts. My husband beats us almost every day. We ran away from home a week ago. She explained that whenever her husband gets drunk, he would turn violent and abuse both her and Nancy. Lisa's parents had already passed away, so she had no family to turn to. Even when they tried to escape to friends' or acquaintances' homes, her husband would quickly find them and drag them back. Even if she reported him to the police, her husband was a smooth talker and would always manage to weasel his way out of trouble. To everyone else, he seemed like a friendly guy, and no one could believe he was capable of such violence. But recently, he'd gotten more violent than ever, and both Lisa and Nancy feared for their lives. When Nancy stepped in to protect her mother, her enraged father yanked her hair as hard as imaginable. Seeing that, Lisa didn't hesitate to grab Nancy and flee from the house. But her husband had threatened them, saying, "If you ask anyone for help, I'll make sure they suffer the same fate." Feeling like they had nowhere to turn, Lisa had been hiding with Nancy in the park, sleeping there for the past week. My husband, he's a monster wearing a human mask. To think he could do this to his own daughter, Nancy. I'm so sorry for bringing you into this kind of life. It's all my fault. As Lisa spoke, she broke down into sobs, her voice filled with pain. Nancy remained silent, her expression blank as she kept her head down. I was too shocked by their story to say anything. But staying in the park like this was dangerous. They could be found by her husband at any moment. If he cared about appearances, he would certainly do everything in his power to drag them back. He was probably searching for them frantically right now. If they were found and taken back, there was no telling what would happen to them next. Sleeping in the cold park for so long must have also pushed them to their physical limits. Realizing that their lives were in danger, I decided to explain my situation and invite them to my home. "But if you help us, you could get dragged into this too," Lisa said. She was right. Hiding them for a long time would be difficult. If her husband found them, he might accuse me of kidnapping and report me. He might have even filed a missing persons report by now. But now that I knew their situation, I couldn't just turn a blind eye. There was some food that Patricia had pre-made, so I gave it to them, and I prepared a bath. "Nancy, don't you want to eat? Are you still in pain somewhere?" I could hear Lisa's worried voice coming from the living room. While I had been living happily until yesterday, Lisa and Nancy had been enduring days filled with fear. I shuddered to think what would have happened to them if I hadn't gone to the park that night. As they took a bath, I started researching government agencies that help people in situations like theirs. In the end, Nancy didn't touch her food, and after getting out of the bath, she immediately fell asleep. Their clothes were in tatters, so I had them wear some of Patricia's clothes. Looking at Nancy's sleeping face, I felt a deep sense of helplessness. Patricia was petite and mostly wore XS sizes, but even those were loose on Nancy's thin frame. There's a facility for mothers and children that helps victims of domestic violence. They might be able to offer you a place to stay, I suggested to Lisa, based on what I'd found. Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "You've done so much for us, total strangers. I don't even know how to thank you, truly." Thank you so much. I had taken the next day off for the final meeting about the wedding, so I went with them. The social worker was incredibly kind and quickly arranged a place for them to stay. Well, this is where I leave you. I turned to face Lisa and Nancy to say goodbye. Lisa thanked me repeatedly, tears streaming down her face, as she said, "Somehow, we'll rebuild our lives together." Nancy never looked me in the eye or spoke a single word. After going through such a traumatic experience at such a sensitive age, it was only natural for her to shut herself off. I handed something to Nancy, who was still looking down. "What is this?" Nancy responded softly, still expressionless, as she glanced up at me. For the first time, our eyes met. Her long lashes framed her light brown eyes, and I felt like I could get lost in them. I was supposed to get married soon, but I don't need this anymore. So I want you to have it. The ring didn't do anything wrong, and I hope you can use it, sell it, or whatever to help with your future. A wedding ring. Nancy stared at the ring and gently slipped it onto the ring finger of her right hand. It was a size 7, a little loose on her thin, delicate finger. "It's beautiful." As she held it up to the sunlight, Nancy smiled, just a little. As a teenage girl, Nancy was probably just happy to have a beautiful piece of jewelry. Seeing her daughter smile for the first time in a while, Lisa began crying again. "Make sure you live happily with your mom." With those words, I turned my back on them and started walking away. 10 years have passed since that day. My life has changed dramatically since I met Nancy and her mother on the same day I broke up with Patricia. The whole engagement breakup was a brutal ordeal, but now it's something I barely think about. To my surprise, Patricia and Daniel ended up getting married after that. None of our mutual friends who knew the situation attended their wedding, though. I thought about suing them for emotional damages, but without solid proof and wanting to avoid any further connection to them, I settled for billing them for the wedding venue cancellation fees. That alone amounted to several thousands of dollars, which neither Patricia nor Daniel could afford. Their parents had to cover the costs for them. Now, here I stand in front of a law firm. After moving out of the apartment I once shared with Patricia, I threw myself into work, and my efforts paid off. At 35, I was promoted to deputy manager. With the company expanding, we needed to hire a corporate lawyer, and I was here on behalf of the busy department head to handle the meeting. As I gazed at the sign that read Brown Law Office, a wave of nostalgia hit me. I wondered how Lisa and Nancy were doing. If I recall correctly, their last name was also Brown. I'd learned it by chance when we were handling paperwork at the welfare office. I just hoped they were living happily, safe from her husband. The lawyer my company hired for this case was also named Brown. The president had personally vouched for his sound judgment and extensive knowledge, saying he would be a great support to the company. The high-rise building in the heart of the city looked like it had a steep rent. I walked into the impressive entrance, rang the intercom, and was guided to the office by a receptionist. "Miss Brown, your client is here." The receptionist called out, and the door opened. I was expecting a brilliant lawyer to step out. Standing tall, I took a deep breath, ready for the meeting. But as I saw the person who came to greet me, I froze in place. Standing before me was Nancy, the girl I had rescued 10 years ago in the park. Nancy. With graceful movements, Nancy handed me her business card. It's been a while, Mr. Mike Anderson. I'm your wife, Nancy Brown, she said with a teasing smile as I stood there, speechless. She had grown into a stunning woman. The business card bore her full name, along with the title of attorney. On her right ring finger was the very ring I had given her that day. The design had been a bit too mature for Patricia, but on Nancy, it looked perfect. That, you didn't sell it? I asked, still struggling to process everything. You said you didn't need it anymore, but to me, it's a treasure from the person who saved my life. I could never sell it. The fact that I'm a lawyer today is thanks to you, Mr. Anderson, for saving me back then. After Nancy and her mother found safety 10 years ago, Nancy transferred to an online high school to avoid being tracked by her father and focused on her studies. She had always been bright and enjoyed studying, so she quickly caught up on any missed lessons and her grades improved rapidly. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious university with a law program and even had her tuition waived. And now, she had fulfilled her long-held dream of becoming a lawyer. As I listened to her story, I forgot I was supposed to be working and collapsed weakly into a chair. How's your mom doing? She's doing great. She found a job after all that. We live apart now, but she's happy and enjoying life. There was still so much more I wanted to talk about, but Nancy had another client coming soon. I gathered myself and focused on the business at hand. Nancy was incredibly sharp. I could easily see why the president of my company had recommended her. Once we finished the meeting, Nancy closed her notebook and turned to me. I was just a kid back then, but now I'm a grown woman. When times were tough, I would wear this ring and think of you, and it helped me keep going. Would you like to grab dinner sometime? There was no reason to refuse. I never forgot about you and your mom. Not for a day. Meeting you again here feels like fate. From that day on, Nancy and I began to meet regularly. We visited her mother, Lisa, together and had an emotional reunion. Lisa was overjoyed, crying tears of happiness after not seeing me for 10 years, and welcomed us warmly. Talking with Nancy was endlessly enjoyable, and spending time with her brought me a lot of joy. We talked about everything from our first meeting 10 years ago to how she lived after we parted ways, her memories from the online high school, her close friends, getting her first boyfriend, and how men stopped approaching her once she became a lawyer. With each meeting, I realized my feelings for Nancy were growing stronger. And it turned out Nancy felt the same way. If you're okay with someone like me, would you go out with me? One evening, while we were driving along a road with a beautiful night view, I confessed my feelings. I've been thinking the same thing. I'd love to. Nancy's eyes, looking directly at me, were just as beautiful and clear as they had been when she was 17. And so, we began dating. I hadn't been in a relationship with anyone since breaking up with Patricia. The days I spent with Nancy were so happy that sometimes I'd suddenly be overwhelmed with the fear that this happiness might crumble one day. There were nights when I would suddenly have flashbacks of Patricia and Daniel lying in bed together, and I'd find myself crying. Whenever Nancy noticed I was struggling with those past traumas, she'd immediately hold me close. Mike, I'm not going anywhere. You're the one who found me. Thank you, Nancy. Nancy also carried the weight of the painful past. She told me there was a time when she had developed a fear of men, and it took her years before she could even talk to one again. Even now, She admitted that seeing men who resembled her father still scared her a little. We have to be happy, no matter what. Until now, I had always wished for Nancy's happiness. But from now on, I promised myself that I would be the one to make her happy. One day, while I was preparing dinner, I suddenly got a call from an unfamiliar number. Since it was on my personal phone, it probably wasn't about work. Maybe just a solicitation call. Casually, I answered, and a familiar voice came through. Mike, how are you? I've been thinking about you. It was Patricia. Instantly, the memories came flooding back, and I hung up the phone without thinking. Trying to calm my breath, I called Nancy. What's wrong? Something happened, didn't it? Nancy's tone changed immediately, sensing that something was off before I even said a word. I told her what had just happened and sorted through my emotions. For my ex-fiancee, who had cheated on me, to contact me after all this time, she must think I'm an easy target. Whatever her reason for calling, it couldn't be good, but maybe it's time I finally confront this trauma head-on. Nancy advised me to block her number and not get involved any further. But I decided to hear Patricia out, determined to close this chapter of my life once and for all. What do you want after all this time? You're still mad about what happened, aren't you? I'm really sorry. Patricia's voice was small, full of regret. But I knew she hadn't called just to apologize. As I pressed for more details, Patricia revealed that after she broke up with me, finding me too boring, she married Daniel, who seemed to offer more excitement. However, Daniel turned out to be a serial cheater, which became a major problem at his company, leading to his dismissal. After being fired, Daniel boasted that he didn't want to work for anyone else and decided to start his own business. Patricia, dreaming of living a luxurious life as the wife of a successful CEO, eagerly supported him. But the business failed, leaving them with massive debt. They hadn't even managed to repay the money her parents had loaned them to cover the canceled wedding fees. And arguments over money had become frequent. In a desperate attempt to pay off the debt, Daniel became addicted to gambling and got involved in shady get-rich-quick schemes. Patricia, you better get out there and help me pay this off. Why should I? It's your debt, so deal with it yourself. Their fights escalated into daily shouting matches, and eventually, Patricia began working at a hostess club. Back when she was younger, Patricia had been idolized for her cute, cheerful appearance, but now that charm had faded and she struggled to bring in the sales she once did. Patricia, too proud to endure it any longer, quit the hostess job soon after. Eventually, Daniel was buried in debt and forced to declare bankruptcy. Apparently, he had borrowed money from dangerous people and is now missing. Though Patricia divorced him, she was still stuck with the repayment responsibilities as a co-signer. If you are out of money, you should just declare bankruptcy too. Having figured out the real reason for Patricia's call, I coldly shot back. That's when she started crying and pleading. Please, I don't want to go bankrupt, Mike. Lend me some money, or at least be my co-signer. My parents disowned me, and if I go bankrupt now, my life is over. Do you really think that'll work on me? Mike, you're kind. You can't just abandon someone in trouble, right? Please, help me out. I was at a loss for words. If you don't want to declare bankruptcy, then work and pay it back. Do you have any idea how much I suffered because of your betrayal? Patricia started whining like a spoiled child. With little work experience, She found it tough even to get a job. I know, but I'm suffering too, she cried. No matter how many times I refused, Patricia kept pushing, so I firmly told her, I'm not lending you any money, and hung up the phone. The cute, innocent Patricia I once knew was long gone. Or maybe she had always been this way, and I just hadn't realized it. Nancy, who had been listening to the conversation from the other room, gave me an exasperated look. See, I told you, but now that you've seen what she's become, I bet that trauma feels a little lighter. After learning about the mess that Patricia and Daniel were in, I felt they had gotten what they deserved. I blocked her number and resumed my peaceful life. But Patricia wasn't ready to give up just yet. While I was at work, I got an internal call. Yes, this is Anderson. Employee. Mr. Anderson, there's a woman in the lobby who says she knows you. I had a bad feeling and headed to the lobby. There, I saw Patricia arguing with a security guard. To think she would go as far as showing up at my company, she really had nothing left to lose. As soon as she spotted me, she yelled, Mike, you still have that wedding ring, don't you? Give it back. I sold the one from when I married Daniel, and it got me a good chunk of cash. I didn't know what kind of life Patricia was living, but her hair was disheveled, her voice was hoarse, and her clothes were filthy. How much more trouble are you going to cause me? I'll call the cops. At the mention of the police, Patricia seemed to back down and, surprisingly, left without further resistance. Feeling the pitiful stares from my coworkers, I told them, call the police if she shows up again, and retreated back to my department. Nancy, concerned for my safety, suggested we meet somewhere close to my office so we could go home together. But since dating the company's legal advisor could cause problems if it got out, we usually arranged to meet somewhere farther away. One day, after work, I was heading to our usual meeting spot when I felt someone's gaze from behind. I turned around, only to see Patricia glaring at me. She was still fixated on me. Feeling a chill of fear, I quickened my pace toward Nancy, who I could see running toward me as she spotted me from a distance. I didn't want Patricia to meet Nancy. With that thought, I turned back toward Patricia. At that moment, Nancy screamed, Mike, look out. Just then, Patricia, holding a box cutter, lunged at me. Mike, you ruined everything. I dodged at the last second and managed to pin Patricia down on the ground. Stop stalking me. My girlfriend is a lawyer, and I will sue you. Why is it only me going through this? Patricia looked utterly devastated as she saw the police, who arrived after Nancy called them, and she was quickly restrained and taken away. She must have held a grudge against me for refusing to lend her money and intended to threaten me with the box cutter. I don't know what happened to her after that, but she never showed up in my life again. During the police questioning, Patricia reportedly said, I couldn't stand the idea of Mike being the only one happy. I never meant to actually stab him. Finally, my life returned to normal. Before I knew it, winter had come again. I sat alone at a restaurant table. Outside, the snow was falling quietly, covering the streets. I watched through the glass as people hurried by, bundled up against the cold. I couldn't help but feel nostalgic, remembering how it had snowed the day I first met Nancy. Then, I saw a figure at the entrance of the restaurant. It was Nancy, dressed up beautifully, smiling shyly. Her beauty caused a stir, with other customers and the staff turning to admire her. Is she an actress? Someone whispered, but I've never seen her on TV. Someone said. Smiling, I escorted Nancy to her seat. How do I look? I went all out tonight, she said with a shy grin. You look stunning, Nancy. I can't take my eyes off you. I knelt down, opened a small box with a ring inside, and said, Will you marry me? Nancy's eyes filled with tears as she smiled and nodded. I gently removed the ring from her right hand and placed the new one on her left ring finger. It's so beautiful. As she held her hand up to the moonlight, tears of joy glistened in her eyes as she smiled. We promised to build the happiest home together. The pain and struggles of the past had all led to this moment, and thanks to Nancy, everything now felt meaningful. From now on, my only goal is to make Nancy the happiest person in the world. Her happiness is my happiness. I don't know what the future holds, but I'll do everything to ensure it's a bright one. However, if you can smile in the end, every part of the past becomes a step toward the happiness you have now.